Today is the first day of Black History Month, and this year's theme is Black Migration. The Association for the Study of African American Life and History says it's paying tribute to, quote, 400 years of the creative industry of people who were kidnapped and brought unwillingly to these shores and who, with resolute African spirit, fought for human dignity and equality. Lionel Kimble is the Associate Professor of History at Chicago State University. He's also Vice President of Programs for the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Professor Kimble, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Well, your organization's founder, Dr. Carter Woodson, is called the father of Black history. Tell us a little bit more about him, and tell us a little bit more about how this celebration of Black history even began.
Well, Woodson was a very interesting person. He was born of parents were slaves, lived in West Virginia, worked in a coal mine for a long time. But I think one of the things about his story, which is very fascinating, is that when he was working, many of the older miners saw something in him. They saw that he had this drive, he had this desire to learn stuff. He taught himself how to read. He became, some people actually call him one of the first Black bibliophiles. He came from a long tradition of Black people who owned books and read books. And he had this desire to educate himself. He went to Berea College for essentially a 2-year degree, and eventually worked his way up to Harvard University, the second African American to get a PhD from that university, following W.E.B. Du Bois. We look at him as the first professionally trained historian that studied the lives and experiences of African Americans. You know, and he goes on and he comes to Chicago to study at the University of Chicago in 1913. By 1915, he's still here. There's this huge celebration that the state of Illinois sponsors to celebrate the end of slavery and emancipation. He goes to this huge convention at this place called the Coliseum Auditorium, which was formerly in downtown Chicago. He sees thousands of people who has a desire to absorb and see these exhibits dealing with the perseverance of Black people in the United States. And he goes back and he develops this idea, which he's been kicking around his head for a number of years, to form the association. And he meets with a colleague of his from D.C. and 3 people from Chicago, and they meet at the all-Black Wabash YMCA, and they form the association in September of 1915.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned that your organization's theme this year is Black Migration. How did you determine that to be the theme this year?
Well, there's a couple of things. I think what's important about the association is that we've been setting the national theme for our 104-year history, and one of the things that happens is that our theme is one of the items that the president uses to sign the Black History Month proclamation. But this year's theme is urban migrations, which is very timely, considering for a number of different reasons. The first one is that we're celebrating or commemorating the 400 years of perseverance in this country, and that really grows out of those 20 Angolans that got off the boat in Jamestown, Virginia in 1619 in the Virginia colonies. So part of the story that we're telling is that from the moment that these 20 people arrived to the shores in the English colonies, that there's been a long struggle for African Americans to survive and persevere and maintain in this country despite a number of obstacles. So that's the one thing. We're celebrating that 400 years. But also, this is really commemorating really the turmoil that came about in many cities after World War I. For example, in my city in Chicago, the 1919 race riot was really a culmination of incidents that came about as more and more Black people, more and more African Americans moved to the city.
You know, so
we're looking at this
Professor,
and how.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's so fascinating because so much of Black History Month you focus on the person, but you don't really look at the process of how the evolution to coming to America. How did Black migration during the 20th century affect the culture of African Americans today in this country?
Well, there's long effects in politics and music and dress and foodways. I think just to point to a number of different examples where we find these folks who come to the South bringing blues music and jazz music and getting involved in politics and labor organizing and shaping unions and just the way we operate and see things in an urban setting. So we continue to really see this playing out. Let's give you an example. Louis Armstrong, which is a person who was near dear to my heart, came from New Orleans to Chicago during 1919, right? And we see what he did to revolutionize jazz music in this country. We see a migrant to my city again, Arthur Works Mitchell, who was the first African-American Democratic congressman after Reconstruction, right? Oscar DePriest, the first another migrant to Chicago, the first African-American to sit in the House of Representatives after Reconstruction. So you find these folks who are coming to the North, and they're essentially go-getters, right? They come up from the Jim Crow South, and they see this opportunity in the North, and they take advantage of it. And I think we're still living the legacies of those people.
Professor Lionel Kimble, we're grateful you could join us with a little more insight on Black History Month.
Thank you.
You bet.